Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name's James Mihm. I'm one of the BMC firmware architects and a team lead at Intel in Hillsboro. And my topic here is going to be manageability security. Okay. My mic's on. Hello? He told me it's on, so. Can you hear me now? Oh, okay. Okay, I'll wait till Rob's done. Okay, I'm going to talk about manageability security, and it's going to be, hello?
He's on, it's just not, so let's just move it up closer.
Hello, is that better? Hello? Better? Okay. Oh. Okay, let's try that. That work, Rob? Okay. My discussion is going to be kind of at a high level. I want to talk about like where we've come from, where we've been, and where we need to be going. And it's going to be based on some of the experiences I've had with some vendors and so forth. So this is kind of where we're at today. We're deprecating RMCP Plus, and we're planning on Redfish to replace it. And of course, that replacement is due to the security vulnerabilities with RMCP Plus. We have in OpenBMC, we have OCP defined profiles implemented in, I think most of them, if not all, are implemented in OpenBMC. We have in the OpenBMC, we have the security work groups, and we have a security architecture spec that was published or checked in last June of 2018. It's still in work, going through review cycles, and when I get spare cycles, I need to go into there and update changes that people have given me feedback on. And as I think Brad hit earlier this morning, we have a reporting process now where people can file security defects with the OpenBMC community. And we could have a product, a response team for BMC issues. And of course, like most recently, we had our first CVE that we had to respond to. So that was a good test out and a rollout of, helped us define what we need to do there. Most of us in our corporate world, we have all that process already defined, and then trying to synchronize our internal processes with the external organization can be tricky at times, but we're learning that as we go. And some of the motivations that we have for improving our security, I think everybody here is probably on the same page. And I guess one of the first questions I wanted to ask was, how many people here are vendors of hardware, either boards or components? How many of you follow a security design life cycle? Okay. I'd like to see that better. That's going to be one of the asks here, is that we get that improved. So one of the motivations, like here with OCP community and even in our OpenBMC community, is to come up with a unified security requirements. And the requirements are not just related to firmware, like those of us on the BMC firmware side, we think we're getting a pretty good handle on that, but we need to extend that beyond firmware and take that down into the actual hardware components. And one of the reasons why we have to do this is, we really have an obligation to protect and defend against attacks. All of us have personal information out there, and for me personally, I take it personal whenever I think about this. I always think about how would I be affected if a server got attacked and got compromised, and it helps me get the right frame of mind when I'm doing my development. And the threat landscape that the BMC firmware has been going through has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. 10, 20 years ago, nobody even cared about the BMC security. some people would say even today that some people don't, but that's changing, of course. And the threats that we're facing are not just causing a denial of service or permanent denial of service, but we have all of the threats for espionage on trying to get into servers and get data, mailing lists, or who knows what else. And the usual hits for national security and protecting personal data is a primary goal here. This is some of the landscape changing that I was referring to earlier. It was like in 2013, I think that was the first public shining of the light, like on BMCs with Dan Farmer's paper. Some of us were contacted about that, and it was like, huh. So we had to react to that. And ever since then, a lot of us have been going through a lot of changes of mindset internally and externally on what needs to be taken care of on the firmware side of things. And of course, like with Dan Farmer's paper, he coordinated with H.D. Moore, and they did a proof of concept for a guide on how to crack RMCP+. So got to watch out for those guys. That's the Metasploit framework that he refers to in his paper. And of course, last year we had that Bloomberg article that I think most of us are probably well aware of. And when I was first approached about that, it was like, I thought it was like that was hype, because there were so many other easier ways to accomplish what they wanted to do. They didn't have to go that far. So I didn't believe it. And then Trammell Hudson, he has a demonstration of actually doing a proof of concept of that kind of an attack. So that kind of makes me go, it's possible. And that's where the nation state kind of attack would come into play, because you'd have to have that kind of resources to pull that off. But and then most recently we have the CVE case that came out, and I call that the exploit of the bare metal recovery feature. And I'm sure that when that was originally done, it was probably done by a customer request, because some people would like to have that capability. And I've done that before with different implementations of having a bare metal recovery update through the host in different implementations in different domains, which is great to have, but you need to have protections around that. And that's like even the vulnerabilities, they're in the data sheet. If you spent time and studied the data sheet, you would have been made aware of those, and you could have asked the questions, and you could have taken steps to mitigate them, which that's what we did at Intel. So I'll leave that at that. And that kind of goes with the evolution of thought here, where everybody's things that we always took for granted before, we got to change the way we're looking at it. One big thing for me recently is like the host interface. We've always implicitly trusted that host interface, because if you always landed on the host, game's over, right? Well, we got that pass we got a pass from our security team before on that, but not anymore, because now you got to think about somebody who gets on the host, they're going to want to do something even more nefarious or something more covert and try to get their own firmware stack on there to do espionage or collect data and send it back home. So you got to worry about those kinds of things. So we got to protect the host interface. So those are some of the things that we're working on, is battening down the host interface so that it's can be authenticated users going over that interface. Or in our case, like with the KCS interface, disable it when you're done. When the BIOS is done, disable it. Don't use it anymore, and go to some kind of a network interface that you can have an authenticated user doing things. So the one line there, security ownership. And that's kind of my whole premise here for this presentation, is to encourage hardware vendors and component vendors to own their own security. One of the things that I've run into with dealing with vendors is when you start asking them, like, how do you protect your firmware image? Do you do signed firmware updates? Do you follow that SDL process? And usually the answer is, huh? And so we go through like an education process, and the ones that I've been dealing with, they actually, I think, are taking it serious. We do help them along, and we do certain mitigations that we can for today. But then the next generation stuff, we expect them to step up their act and follow things better. And that goes along with like some of the advanced features. Like the advanced features in the past have always been KVM and remote media. Those are the advanced features that everybody wants the BMC for. But we have more advanced features coming down the pike, and new technologies come on board. They want to put those in the BMC. First one that comes to my mind is JTAG debug. You want to do that remote JTAG debug. Well, you got to think about how that can be used maliciously. So now we got to think about all of the hardware controls that need to go around that, so that somebody can't break into there and own your servers and your data center. And this is one of the contention between usability and security. This is one thing that we've always experienced, even recently, is like when you start looking at things that are vulnerable, that it could be part of the spec, like RMCP+. When you think about, okay, that's vulnerable. How do you get rid of it? Oh, we're going to replace it with Redfish. That's a whole chain reaction of things that are going to happen. And people have scripts that are out there that have 2 decades worth of time on them using RMCP+. Now we're saying switch to Redfish. So that's a big lift for a lot of people. So we're having to do the compromise of having both implemented in the beginning, RMCP+ like disabled by default. And if you want to go insecure, you got to flip that switch, make sure you got all your backups in place. And then once they're able to get their migration to Redfish, then we can eventually no longer have RMCP+. And even some of the other standard interfaces that are part of specifications that a lot of people use. That when you go to turn them off, and a lot of people will get upset with you, and that's been my experience, is that, why did you take this away from me? Because I use this. I use this to validate things. And it's like, well, it's because people can use it badly. So we put in security controls around it, and some of them, they make them go through an extra step, but that's something that we even have to redesign some of the things that we're doing in manufacturing, where manufacturing capabilities need to be more well-defined and have the least privilege to do the job that you need to do, and no more. In the past, we've always taken the tack of, well, we're going to provide this capability because it'll let you do anything you want. You can do all your thermal profiles and have fun doing it, which is great during development, but we can't ship products with those things enabled. So that's the big compromise between having something that's secure but usable. And then it's usable internally or in the factory, and being secure outside of at the customer site. Yeah, this is for a long time, these are my sleepless nights. These are the things that I've always worried about. The big one for me has always been that rogue firmware developer. That's the one I worry about the most. And that's kind of you'd think going open source, is that going to make that better, or is that going to make that worse? It's like, I don't know, we'll see. I'm expecting it to make it better because everybody's going to be looking at it, and we should all be looking at, having each other's back on that. But some of the attacks that I worry about are like somebody injecting a bug that could be exploited that nobody would catch unless they knew exactly what they were doing. Some of the static analysis tools will help catch some of that, I hope, but those are things that I worry about. And the nation states, I think I hit on that with like the Bloomberg article in the supply chain. And that Bloomberg article, it's like it hit on all 3 of these things. That's why it was very interesting to go through and do some thought experiments on, if I wanted to accomplish this goal, how would I do it? And then you start looking at how things can be attacked. What features are there that are within their touch that they can win at. And so these are some of the recommendations that I have for like the OCP community. This is one, the big thing in my premise in my presentation here is like to expect more from vendors. Start holding them more accountable for their own security, making sure that we got security controls in place that will allow us to be able to do the job that needs to be done, provisioning, configuration, and then once we're done with that, lock things down. And they stay locked down. They're not controlled by software or firmware. They stay that way until you come back to life after an AC power cycle. And with OCP community, that defining our security requirements, and I'm going to take the position that I'm going to have to get more engaged with the OCP security community to help define some of those requirements for some of the things that we've seen that we want to have improved security on. And the ask here for like the vendors, adopt the security design lifecycle, get educated on it. Microsoft has a really good website that basically you can use to get educated on it. They have threat modeling tools that you could use. You could use that as your starting point for developing your own security design lifecycle. I look at that and I look at like Intel's, and it's like, they're pretty close. I mean, it's like, you can tell that those security guys were probably talking to each other. So it's very good. It's the place I recommend everybody to go to. All the companies I talk to, as they go there, learn what it is. And to own your own security. Don't depend on the BMC to be your front line of defense. You know, if the BMC got compromised, how are you going to protect your components? That's the big ask there. Architecting for security, these are all these are all obvious things, you know, not reinventing the wheel. Don't invent your own crypto libraries, right? Because that's stupid. Provisioning and access controls, those need to be designed in. And that goes with what I said earlier about doing all that configuration provisioning and then locking it down. And then the hardware protections, being able to, like if you're providing hardware, look at ways that you can protect your hardware. Assume that the BMC is compromised, and after you've been provisioned, what are the dangerous bits? What can be happening there? And then take steps to mitigate those. One thing I ask for the vendors, like with the definition of the requirements, is ask the community, get involved with even the Open BMC community, the OCP community, ask questions, ask for help. There's lots of opinions. I'm sure you'll hear them all. And you can digest it and make better products out of that. And originally I thought I would do a quick threat model kind of analysis, but you can't do justice to that in the amount of time I got here. So I just want to kind of do an introduction for people that aren't aware of like how to do a threat model, but like identifying your components, the domains, the component domains like your flashes, your SM bus devices, your PCIe add-in cards. Identify those, identify the interfaces, figure out where your trust control compute boundary is, wall them off, figure out what kind of access controls you need to put in place to protect those devices, because they could be done in hardware, they could be done in firmware, or both. And this was one of the other steps, is identifying all those high-value assets. And it goes along the same lines of how you can protect those. And we have the advanced features like with PFR, Cerberus, and Titan, that take a good approach on protecting these items for existing devices that are existing today that don't have security built into them. But as we get devices that have security built into them, that might change. And this was my call to action here for OCP, defining security requirements and doing a security architecture spec for every domain that there is. One for compute, storage, and then networking. Getting all those defined so that people know what their requirements that they're going to be held to, so they're not surprised. And there's a presentation after mine by Patrick on PMCI security requirements, which when I learned about his presentation, it was in alignment with what I'm asking. So, I've talked to other people throughout the conference here, and I think there's a lot of synergy that can happen where people have the same thoughts and same ideas of where we need to be going with security. The meetup that is almost over. Downstairs, yesterday we did have a security meeting with, I had one with Nuvoton. They showed up and talked to me. but that was it. I'll be available afterwards if anybody wants to talk, bend my ear or educate me on anything that they're aware of. I'd be glad to hear it. We have the security work groups. I don't just mean the OpenBMC security work group, but the OCP security work group too. Then there's OCP management, hardware management. To me, the security work group and the hardware management, they're bound at the hip there. They go hand in hand. And I have the links there for where to go, especially like the Microsoft SDL. That's where you want to go to get educated. So that's it. Anybody have any questions? Go, John.
So is OpenBMC going through a security life cycle for you then?
It's a good question. I want to say yes, only because like all of our corporations, like here at Intel, we have one, and we're going to follow that. And one of the challenges I have is how do I synchronize our internal SDL cycle with the external world? Even like when we have defects that are found, P-certs that happen, we're not going to share that with the world until it's mitigated. And how do you synchronize that and educate other people on how to, especially if they're vulnerable to it, give them a heads up. Got to work out all those clearances and make sure that, that's why the security work group in OpenBMC is kind of tightened down, because we all recognize that if somebody has a vulnerability in their product, we need to get it mitigated and out there and deployed before we talk about it out in the public. So I want to say yes, and I will say yes, that we will. Any other questions? If not, I think that's all I got.